we're going to throw a lot of data at you tonight. Our goal is to provide you context. Now, we've been at this in this city now with this particular strategy for the last 4 years come January 8th. And we've worked hard to develop what we call a community-based, problem-oriented, data-driven strategy. The community-based part is putting a lot of authority in the hands of our district commanders, and through them, our officers in your neighborhoods, fulfilling our mission. And the mission statement this police department adopted 3.5 years ago was that the mission of this police department is to create neighborhoods that can sustain civic life. That's our mission. Our mission isn't to make arrests, all right? It's one of the things we do, but it's not our mission, all right? Our mission isn't to write tickets. It's something important we do, but it's not our mission. The reason a free people empowered democratic policing was so that they could use their neighborhoods for the purposes for which they were intended, to raise children and pursue the American dream. That's why you're all here. That's why you take time out of your lives, and some of you take risks in your neighborhoods to stand up for the values of strong neighborhoods that can affirm child rearing and allow people to live in peace and pursue the American dream. Now, if there's one thing we know, in many of our central cities, including Milwaukee, there are neighborhoods where people are not enjoying the freedoms of free Americans. They're living in fear because people with guns, who are bullies and have their own agendas, hold neighborhoods hostage and threaten young people. We know this. So when we came here and adopted as our mission to help create strong neighborhoods, we said we were going to do it based in the community, oriented around solving problems, not just responding to calls, and using data to drive our deployments and hold ourselves accountable. All right, if we're going to do something, we need to measure that it mattered. If we're going to do something, we have to be willing to report on what happened. If we're going to do something, we've got to justify it, and what we have at our disposal is data. So we're community-based, those captains, and you. We're problem-oriented, and we're data-driven. And our goal is to reduce crime, fear, and disorder so these neighborhoods can come together. Now, for the last 4 years, we've been working real hard at improving our relationship with neighborhoods so we had achieved some level of legitimacy. We in this police department and in the police profession know we have inherited a social history of which we can't always be proud. And that's true in every American city. Through the course of America's experience with new groups in town, the police have often been in the middle of great conflict and not infrequently been agents of social control to preserve a status quo. All right? It's happened to everybody's people in this room at some time or another. And certainly in Milwaukee in the last 40 years, you've had your own rich history, problematic as it has been, sometimes between the police and the community. So we work to transcend that because we have to work together to achieve a just result, which is safe neighborhoods you can live in. Now, we've been producing a lot of data for the last 4 years. I'll be sharing it with you. Why tonight? Why now? One of the issues that in the last 15 years has arisen in policing is the expression known as racial profiling. The implication that police choose tactics driven by bias rather than a legitimate social need. Now, everybody in this room is old enough to remember when that issue started to come to the fore. Okay? I remember vividly. Starting in the mid-90s, the Department of Justice of the United States decided to teach highway patrol agencies drug courier profiling. They gave classes in it. The Drug Enforcement Agency taught these classes. And they developed drug courier profiles based on prior experience of drug courier arrests. Now, there's a surface logic in that, right? This is the picture of the guys we've locked up in the last 5 years driving up Route 95 from Florida to Massachusetts. This is what they look like. This is what their cars look like. These are the behaviors they engage in. Target this subset of drivers. Now, on the surface, that made sense. But as a thoughtful social scientist will tell you, if you base your future response just on what you did in the past, you're going to keep getting what you got. And what began to happen on the highways of America is it became very, very clear that given the number of people that use the highway, i.e. from all over America, and who was getting targeted for stops, there was a significant disparity between white and black Americans getting pulled over on the highway and checked out as possible drug couriers. And one of the standards that were used was the so-called hit rate, which is what percentage of these stops are resulting in drug seizures. And they found the hit rate between the races was identical, but the number of black people stopped was far higher, which meant more of them were going to jail. So implicit in this was that bias, conscious or unconscious, driving a police strategy was having an adverse impact on a particular community, and also theoretically letting a lot of drug dealers get through because they weren't stopping more of other kinds of people. And so the Justice Department again got involved, only this time it was the Civil Rights Division. There were lots of lawsuits. There were consent decrees. There were rulings and findings. Okay? That's the backdrop of the racial profiling issue. As a career professional, I began to experience some frustration and concern about this issue because my career was in urban policing. At the same time this was going on in highways, police departments in cities were beginning to embrace community policing, right? Going to communities, going to neighborhoods, finding out what people were complaining about and what they wanted, and trying to respond. We were also embracing what's known as the CompStat process, computer statistics, meaning we were analyzing crime patterns and trends, putting them on big charts at our meetings that we have every day, analyzing where the crime was occurring, putting dots on maps to find out where there were clusters, and saying, what are you doing about those dots? What do they mean? All right? What activities are we undertaking to disrupt that? And we were measuring crime trends. And computers were enabling us to do it accurately. So two things were happening at the same time, and it was only a matter of time until they started to collide. Highway patrols were under consent decrees for differential policing because of their discretionary stops. Were targeting people. Race was a significant factor. They were pulling a lot of them over to seize drugs. Cities were going to their neighborhoods and saying, what do you want us to do? And I will ask this question now. Has anybody here ever been in a community meeting in this city where people said we want fewer police in our neighborhood? Okay? Has anybody here been to a meeting where people said, will you take it easy with like walking around and checking people out and putting your lights on? Please, will you stop that in my neighborhood because it's making too much noise? All right? I mean, people in this neighborhood light up 911 with, we want you to do something now here. And certainly it's been clear at meetings you've been with these commanders and their predecessors, many of whom now wear stars, that you had demands and expectations for the police. You expect us to work with you. You expect us to respond to your concerns. And the third part, which may have been the most important to be legitimate, you expect us to treat you with respect. Now, I think we've made a lot of progress on those three fronts in the last several years. I think there are I think you're feeling a sense of partnership with the police department at the district level. I think you have a sense it's responding to your concerns, not always as successfully as we would like, but we're certainly not ignoring them. And if the feedback I get and the data I analyze any indication, people are perceiving they're being respectfully treated. Okay? They're not, when we move into that neighborhood, we're not invading anymore. We're moving in because we're liberating. Okay? We're working with the people in that spot. We're not just everybody up against the wall randomly. All right? I remember those days. You probably do too. So these are big differences. Having said all of that, our friends at the Journal-Sentinel, who have taken a keen interest in police operations these last several months, Delightful interest. I'll just share this with you, and this isn't to bash anybody. I'm just going to repeat a fact. There is one reporter from the Journal Sentinel assigned to all of county government. There is one reporter from the Journal Sentinel assigned to all of city government, and there is one reporter from that newspaper assigned to the entire school system. There are 3 reporters assigned to the police department. We are a source, obviously, of endless fascination. So, having said that, and remember, we keep track of what we do, and that's what we're going to show you tonight. They made an open records request of our car stop data. You will remember in 2010, a law was passed to go into effect in January to require police departments to collect data by race on whom they stop. We were doing that already. And when that law was repealed in January of this year, we voluntarily continued to collect the data. Why? Because we want to know what we're doing. We want to account for our use of authority, and we want to be able to explain it to the community, to the community's leaders, you. All right? Now, we've been prepared to do this all along. That's why I have all this stuff at my fingertips. But now we've been caught, okay? And they're going to do an article, and the purpose of the article is to show, you may be horrified to hear what I'm about to say, there are racial disparities in our car stops based on the formula the Journal Sentinel is using. Okay? Now, I'm going to represent that the most disgraceful disparity we have in this city is victims of violent crime. And we'll show you the numbers about that disparity. Who's getting murdered, who's getting robbed, who's getting their house broken into, who's getting their car stolen. And we're going to share with you what our crime analysis tells us about where the crimes are, i.e. where the victims live, and what tools we have at our disposal to be proactive, which are largely stopping cars and people and having a conversation. So let me start out with the overall data, and then I'll move you through it. If you have a question on a particular slide, stop me. Otherwise, we can move through and have questions after, wherever you want to interrupt. And I'm surrounded by smart people, so when I start stuttering, they'll know when to step in. Okay? All right. Do I have a clicker, or are you going to do it?
I'll take care of it.
Okay, first slide. Now, I'd say they've seen me do this before, and I'm lousy at it. This is our overall crime statistics covering the last 5 years. The first 11 months of the last 5 years. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We use 2007 as the base because that's the year before we took over. All right? Point we want to make is there has been change. For the first 11 months, those were the numbers. As you can see, compared to the baseline year, we have 24% less violent crime than we had 5 years ago, and almost 21% less property crime, and we have 21% less overall crime. Stolen cars are down almost 40%. And in some neighborhoods, it's our profound belief that a stolen car is a stolen job. I'm not talking about joyriding now. People are stealing cars and taking them to the scrapyard. They're disappearing. And when people lose their cars in some neighborhoods, they lose their ability to work. That's a significant challenge. It's a reason why we have spent a lot of resources trying to affect the environment of where these cars are stolen. The research that I inherited is that active use of stolen cars has a direct impact. Active use of car stop behavior by the police has a direct impact on stolen cars. Every month, we re-identify the most frequently stolen cars in each district. And what do we ask the captains to have their people do? What's the most frequently stolen car in your district?
Dodge Caravan.
Dodge Caravan. How about you?
Caravan.
How about you, Terrence?
Dodge Caravan.
What do you think we stop a lot of? Anybody here drive a Dodge Caravan? No, because I was going to ask you if you've been stopped, because you should have been. Jim, do you drive a Dodge Caravan? Have you been stopped? Got to quit badging them. Okay. Point I want to make is overall, all right, overall, the first 11 months of 2007, we had 35,000 victims of crime. The first 11 months of this year, we've had 27,000 victims of crime. 8,000 fewer victims should mean something. That's our goal. Communities that are afraid because they're afflicted cannot be strong. People will not come together and work together if it's too risky. We want to show you the results of our work. 7,000 fewer victims in the first 11 months of this year compared to our baseline year. Next slide. When I came here, I wanted to make sure that this police department went back on offense. It had been beaten up for several years. We were playing defense. I wanted to make sure when we went on offense, we did it in a way that connected to the neighborhoods. There had to be communications. People had to understand what we were about to do. And you may recall, some of you, we did a series of meetings across the city in which I asked the district commanders, every one of you, identify your major crime problem, identify a solution, have a community meeting to announce it, and then 6 weeks later, we're going to have another meeting and show you how we've done. And that was our first crack at it. One of the things we knew is we had to create time for our officers to investigate, to look into suspicious conditions, to occupy public space. As long as we were hostages to the radio system and spent all of our time answering calls, we had no coppers in the public spaces. And when there's no police in the public spaces, the community loses confidence. And when the community loses confidence, it abandons those spaces. And who do you think occupies them? All right? That's what was happening. So we needed to do two things. We needed this department to be visible, and we needed it to be active. We started to take more calls over the phone and started to create more foot patrols and more bicycle patrols and time for officers to do directed patrol missions, which means that hotspot over there. I want you to stop cars and talk to people. I want you to disrupt the environment because the cops are here now. All right? And if you stay in the same neighborhoods over and over again, you're going to do something very important. You're going to develop the social antenna to know who's who. Because when the day comes, I want this guy over here who we know is a knucklehead. I'm happy if he got stopped 10 times in 1 week. Meanwhile, somebody else who's out late at night because they work at night, after the first couple of times somebody checks them out, everybody knows that's the guy who works at night. And people can kind of settle. The cops get familiar with the comings and goings of the neighborhood. They get to know who's who in the neighborhood. And even though we stay active, the key is to retain neighborhood support for those efforts. Okay, what happened? 44,000 stops in the first 10 months of 2007. First 10 months of 2010, 163,700 stops. 2011, we're slacking off. There's only 153,000. I'm going to have to talk to the captains. But the point is, if you look at that bottom number, we've done a 250% increase in our interventions with cars on the street. That's a huge increase, right? Look at that bottom number. Swear to God. External complaints in 2007 to 2011. Or excuse me, 2007 to 2011, we've had a decrease of 44%. Okay? From last year to this year, there's a 17% decrease. From 2007, when there were 466 citizen complaints against this department, in the first 10 months, this year there are 257. And we've got more places to complain than ever before. Now that means something. To me, that means we're operating with community approval and support. And it also means that our boys and girls are learning how to talk to people. If you can increase, I would have thought if you're going to quadruple the amount of activity, okay, if you hold constant, then all right, if I had 4 times as many complaints, I really had the same number of complaints. But I not only didn't get 4 times as many complaints, I got less complaints in real numbers. And that's been true for every single year of the last 4 years. Next slide. Subject stop activity, it's the same dynamic. All right, stopping and talking to people. A lot fewer subject stops, it's easier to stop a car. 49,000 subject stops this year, 12,000 in 2007. Same dynamic. Because it's the same, I'm counting complaints for everything, all right? But still in all, with that increase, a 240% increase in subject stops, a 250% increase in car stops, and a decline in citizen complaints. That's what I mean about community partnerships. Next line. We had our researchers do a study. It's hard to explain, not because I don't think you'd understand it, but because I don't completely understand it. The correlation coefficient, the idea behind it, is to show you the relationship between something you're doing and something you're trying to affect. Okay? The bigger the gap, the better. Ideally, if your activity is going up, you want the thing you're affecting to clearly go down. This is stolen cars over the course of the last 5 years, from January of 07 to now, 4.5 years. Okay? A coefficient of -8.1, that's really big. And what that means is, if you'll notice, here's our car stops, kind of noodling along here. Here's our stolen cars, higher than our car stops. Then look what happens. Car stops start to go up. And what happens to car thefts? Look at that. There's the crossover point. September of 08. That's when we really started to ramp it up. We go up, they go down. We go up again, they go down. We go up again, they come up a little bit. We go up. Whoa, what the heck's going on down here? Well, look at that. We slacked off a little bit, and we had a spike. We ramp up the car stops. The stolen cars go down. We get a little lazy. They start to go up again. They noodle along here as we noodle along here. Again, we get a little lazy. All right? Spike it up, it drops. Starts to go up again. Car stops start to come down again. We start to push them up. It starts to decline again. All right? There is an absolute correlation between us being busy about cars. South side, it's Honda Civics and Honda Accords. North side, it's Dodge Caravans. Now, there are other cars as well, but those two just bubble up all the time. And so some people we stop a lot, and I'll show you some of that in a little while. The point is, there is an absolute correlation between getting busy with cars and stolen cars. The next one, subject stops versus robberies. There is a correlation. It's not as strong. All right, robbers use the street. Our assumption is if we get on the street and talk to people, we're going to have an impact on behavior. We're going to do some deterrence behavior. We're going to be in that public space. As you can see, again, there is a correlation. You'll notice when our activity goes up, the robbery activity goes down. It is not as clear and high as the peaks and values are for stolen cars. But there is, nonetheless, in some months, when we increase that activity significantly, there's a clear drop in robberies. Once again, we really, but it still went up. And we went up again, it went down. We started to go up, it started to climb up again. We go up, it's still a little high. This year, robberies are up over last year. No surprise. I mean, you probably know that. They're certainly down compared to a few years ago, but they're up this year. It's been a very stubborn problem. But there is a statistically significant correlation between being busy on the street with pedestrians and street robberies. Next one. All right. I showed this one to the newspaper to try to get them to understand what it is we're doing. This is a density map. The darker it is, that means the more of what we're measuring is inside that circle. All right? Now, we drew several lines here because this is where we are focusing the bulk of our resources based on what's happening there. If you'll look at it, and I have to get close to it because I can't read as well as I used to. In both maps, the black line represents the highest density of calls for service. This is where we're getting the most calls from people asking us to do something. The green line is violent crime. This is the highest concentration of violent crime in the city. The orange line is the highest concentration of car stops in the city, and the red line is the highest concentration of pedestrian stops in the city. This is compared to minority population. This is compared to the total population of Milwaukee. So you can see there are some very dense areas in Milwaukee outside this ellipse. But inside this ellipse, in the next chart, can you put the next chart just on one screen? Is that possible? So I could have all three up at the same time? It's not possible. Okay. Does this ellipse look much different than the last one? Okay. This is the poverty population. I mean, this is not news to anybody, all right? Our highest concentrations of poverty are our places where we have our highest concentrations of violent crime, our highest concentrations of citizens calling us, and therefore our highest concentration of proactive police activity, which means cars and coppers stopping folks, stopping cars, intervening, being active. All right? How many of your block groups are inside this ellipse? A lot of them, right? I mean, this is a big piece. This is a piece of 2. It's a big piece of 5 and 3 and 7. So if you're in 3, 5, and 7, you own a piece of this ellipse. Okay? I mean, this is where we're fighting it out, guys. Okay. Next slide. Again, the same ellipse, because this is where they're stopping. What we found is we have been trying to not just target cars, but target known offenders. We want them, the term we use inside the police department is we want to take away their anonymity. All right? It's not space aliens dropping from the skies victimizing people, it's neighbors. It's people who live a few blocks over. If we know their name and know their face and call them by name, it affects their behavior. Being known undermines criminal effectiveness. Trying to pull out of the car stop data who our frequent flyers are is difficult, except through citation information. And so I've got a data point here that's not on a chart, but there's an example there of of 21 folks that we have stopped a lot of times. 21 people, actually 21, 22, 23, 24 people well known to us have been stopped 293 times. Now, why do you think we're doing that? Because we know the guy. Okay? We know the guy is a bad guy. If I know a guy's been arrested several times for drugs or burglary, and I see him driving slow around the neighborhood, what do you want us to do? Hello, have a nice day. What you doing here? What's new? Hey, might want to get that taillight fixed. You know, how you doing? When did you get out of jail? Oh, good. Okay, who's your probation officer? Ah, good. Well, listen, I'll give him a call and tell him I saw you. All right? Right? That's what we expect. I think you expect us to do that. That's what we expect to do to them as well. And I've got here, somebody gave me, they ran some numbers of those 20 guys. And, hold on a minute. Sometimes it's possible to have too much information at your fingertips. Okay, of these guys, of the 24 prolific offenders we have here, that was our first cut at the data, 20 of them have a criminal history. I guess the other ones are just bad drivers. Those 20 people have been arrested 104 times. All right? On a total of 194 charges, and they've all got felony convictions. The point is, they're not alone. But our challenge is we get better attuned to crime data, but also know the community. We're going to recognize people that need our special attention. Now that guy's just going to be reflected in the data as an African American, 20 car stops of an African American. But it, in fact, is, 20 guys stopped 700 times because they committed 108 crimes. Because people expect us to know what's going on in their neighborhoods. Next slide. All right, this is, again, those are percentages. Every one of your districts has a percentage of how much violent crime happened between 2007 and 11. Although the total crime has decreased, the percentages really haven't. Okay? As you can see, District 5. Who gets District 5? Terrence, you have District 5. See, we put people in District 5 that we want to make really, really old fast. But as you can see, we've got 7 districts. District 5, 21% of our violent crime, 24, 24, 25, 25% of our violent crime. There's a lot of stuff going on in District 5. It's a tough place. Now, I'm glad there's less violent crime now than there was in 2007, but it's still 25% of the violent crime. District 3, green, 21%. District 7 is 20%. 3, 5, and 7. 25, 21, 23 districts responsible for 2/3 of the crime in Milwaukee. You saw the ellipse before? 3, 5, and 7. Okay? 3, 5, and 7. The next one after that is 2, and we spent a lot of activity down in 2 as well, obviously. Okay, next slide. Okay, when we decided to ramp up car stops, and we knew we were going to be targeting the highest crime areas, every district has to make lots of car stops. So don't get me, District 1's got to do it, District 7's got to do it, District 6, District 4, everybody's got to do car stops. We ask them about it every day. But we knew, given the amount of officers we were putting in 3, 5, and 7, this is where the ball game was going to be won or lost. It occurred to me, we're using lawful traffic violations to stop people. If we're not careful, we will have imposed a poor people tax on 3, 5, and 7. Trying to lower crime with car stops is going to create a condition where we can write a boatload of tickets. That's not necessarily what we're trying to do. Now, if we get a known burglar, he will probably get tickets. All right? But if I get the school teacher coming home from work and the taillight's out, that's a different set of circumstances, okay? Because the one thing I know about a burglar, we might not convict him of the burglary, but the tickets will follow him to his grave. Those warrants for the tickets, they'll be out like nobody's business. At any rate, when we issue the order to do this, based on data, we instructed officers to, whenever they can, exercise their discretion to warn, not cite. I wanted us to be busy. I wanted us to be visible. I wanted us to be active. I did not want us to be making people's lives miserable whose only offense was they're where we're stopping lots of cars. Okay, by district, these are percentages. Blue is you got a ticket, red is you got a warning. 60% of District 1's car stops are warning. Districts 2, 66%. District 3, 61% are warnings, not citations. District 4, 80%. That's where you want to get stopped. District 5, 66% are warnings, 29% are citations. District 6, 72%. District 7, 73% are warnings, not citations. The NTF, as you can see, is much closer. They're the tactical guys. They're the motorcycles. They live for tickets. Okay, that's always been their mission. So they still get more warnings and tickets, but they do write more tickets than anybody else. And that's all the other bureaus. The point is, and maybe this is affecting our citizen complaints, I don't know. Nobody likes to get stopped by the cops. Everybody likes to get a break. And we're trying to give breaks. We want to talk to people. We want to have that conversation. It's a threshold inquiry. If that threshold inquiry reveals somebody getting really nervous and hinky and trying to hide stuff, and he keeps looking to the same place hoping we don't see where his eyes are going, that's a different thing. But an awful lot of these circumstances are just somebody driving on the roads. Okay, fine. Hi, how are you? Did you know this? Did you know you rolled through that stop sign? Okay, take it easy next time. Have a nice day. Next slide. Okay. we do this for other crimes later on. What I wanted you to have a sense of is who are the victims of our crimes. Green means we don't know who the suspect was, all right? As you would assume, there's a lot of burglaries we don't solve. It's the nature of burglary. It's a crime of stealth. But for those crimes for whom we know who the offender is and we know who the victim is, these are the percentages. We talked about disparity in the city. 73% of our victims of aggravated assault in Milwaukee are African American, almost 3/4. And as you would expect, since that's usually a crime among people that know each other, 72% of the identified suspects are African American. Burglaries, we don't know the suspects 70% of the time. So this is, a great unknown. 55% of burglaries take place in the households of African Americans. Remember the ellipse? All right, 64% of our suspects, but we have 27% unknown. Almost 80% of the murder victims in this town are African American. That's a huge disparity because it's sure not 80% of the population, is it? All right? Saying the poverty ellipse, the violent crime ellipse, it's as old as American history, but they're the same ellipse. Next slide. Okay, District 1 isn't here today. District 2, District 3 is here today. Let's look at District 3, which is where we are. Okay. This is the crime data for aggravated assaults, burglaries in this district. Michael, why don't you tell them what they say? Because you're living it.
Yeah, of course, most of the victims are, African American, unfortunately. Arrestee, suspect, same thing. I mean, it goes all the way across, except the same thing fits for burglaries as we don't know a lot of those suspects, of course, but everything else follows the pattern. 86%, I mean, it's a huge amount. Huge amount, so.
What is that? 86% of the victims of aggravated assault, 94% of the victims of murder in this district.
Yeah,
all right.
That's almost 100%.
So if we're going to get busy, we're going to get busy here. Next slide, District 4. We have District 4 people here? Yes, no? Okay, District 5 then. All right. District 5, Terrence, any surprises there?
Not really.
All right, I mean, I have a feeling I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I just want you to see it graphically. I want you to know that we know, okay? We're paying attention to this stuff. We're factoring it into what we're trying to do. We're not blundering around in the city, not knowing the effect we're having on people's lives, and not knowing that we're trying to help and make a difference in these neighborhoods. District 7. Let's go slip up to that one. All right, again, very similar dynamic. All right? Inside that ellipse, that's where we've got our violent crime problems. All right, next slide. This is our overall crime victimization. We take the whole city and put victims by race when the race is known. All right, this is by district. This is all the crime lumped together: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, theft, burglary, car theft, so on. Okay? Again, very similar dynamics. Figuring out, you'd figure District 6 where the victims would be and District 1 where the victims would be. You'd figure a lot of victims Hispanic in District 2. That's true. And then here we are, 3, 5, 7. 65%, 72%, and 76% of all crimes in those three districts afflict the same folks in the same neighborhoods. And 7, as you can see, it's almost 3/4. Next. Robbery victimization, we broke that out because that's a street crime. Once again, that's what we're trying to affect with our pedestrian stops. As you can see, District 2 is what you would expect, as is District 1. 3, 4, 5, 7, once again, have that heavy disparity in who's being victimized by crime. Something a lot of professors don't want to talk about when they talk about police stops. But this is what we're responding to. People that live there don't want to be victimized anymore, and they expect us to do something. Next. Auto theft. That's what we're trying to affect with car stops, as well as the general environment of impunity. And once again, who lives there is who gets victimized. Now the difference is 76% in District 5 means a lot different thing than it might mean in District 6. Why? Because the number of crimes is so much higher. So it's not just that 76% of the victims are African American, it's 76% of a much bigger number than that same percentage would be in District 6 or District 1. You may be 50% of the victims in one of those districts, but there's not a lot of crime. So it's a lower number of people getting victimized. This is a high concentration of victims, not just a high percentage of victims. Yes, sir?
When you say crime, how many is that with weapons?
I don't have that with us. We track it. It's a lot. You know, I can tell you that. Aggravated assaults, a lot of those are committed with firearms. We have a significant armed robbery problem in this town. And we do. And we look at, in our daily numbers, they're not considered separate crimes, but every day we track the number of shootings. They would be carried in the aggravated assault statistics, but we pull out separately non-fatal shootings, robberies committed with handguns, and we also pull out aggravated assaults with weapons, robberies with weapons, and non-fatal shootings. So we track that number, but it's not a official crime.
So now why do we have this gun law?
You're going to have to ask somebody else. I guess because there weren't enough guns. That's not stepping in that quicksand tonight, my friend. Next slide. All right, this is the suspect data. Again, no surprises. All right, people in Milwaukee tend to get victimized by people who look like them. There are some exceptions, obviously, but if you look at the districts, once again, we've got a very high concentration of suspects. Now remember, in some of those crimes, there's an unknown who the suspect is. But these are the ones that we do know. When the race is known, it's very high. Again, the same ellipsis we were looking at before. High concentrations of poverty, high concentrations of minority residents, high concentrations of violent crime. There's no surprises here, all right? And once again, the question is not if we respond to it, but in what manner do we respond to it, and are we working with our block captains and our neighborhood groups? Next slide. There's our traffic stop data. That is by district. And we've broken out the race of whom we're stopping by district. So if you go back, for example, preceding slide, let's go back a minute. All right, District 3, 93% of our described suspects are African American. And our car stops in District 3? 79%? Okay. District 4, back again. 96%? Is that what it said? 90%, sorry. You better read it because you're closer. And District 4 here? 85. All right? Now, understand, I'm not saying every car stop is looking for a particular suspect. I'm not going to slide over that way. But what I am saying is that's a reasonable benchmark about who's living where we're stopping. Because people commit burglaries and robberies fairly close to home. Not too many of them are commuting across district lines to do that. All right? If they're going to commit a robbery, they want to get out fast and get undercover. Our robbers tend to live within 4 to 6 blocks of the robbery, right? Okay? Same thing is true with our burglars. Some of them, yes, they're high-rate offenders with long records and they drive around the city breaking into houses. But an awful lot of our juvenile robbers and our juvenile burglars and other burglars, they stay where they know the turf. They know where to escape. They know where the cut-throughs are. They know they fit in. All right? Okay, next. Subject stops. Now, the question is, what's the disparity? Meaning, what's the denominator we're being compared to? The newspaper has developed a formula based on the estimated driving population of the metropolitan area. I'm not going to quibble. We're basing our efforts on location, victim, and offender information. That's what we got. That's what we know. That's our reality. There's a golden triangle we use in policing. You've probably heard it, some of you, from your districts. All my district commanders have it memorized, right? I'm going to take a chance here. Captain Howard tends to be our best pupil. What are the 3 10%?
All right. 10% of our victims are victimized 40% of the time. 10% of our offenders commit 50% of the offenses. and 60% of our offenses occur at 10% of the locations.
Very good. And it's true, which means we have to focus. You know, we started out focusing on districts. We started to learn to focus on squad areas. We've gotten to the point now where we're starting to focus on specific blocks because we're trying to drive down into offender-based and location-based policing. If we know that 10% of our locations are going to generate 60% of the crime, remember the density map? Then we've got to be there doing something. If we know 10% of our offenders are responsible for 50% of the crime, remember those 20 guys and 109 crimes? We've got to target those guys. We've got to drive around looking for people. And if we see them, we have to encounter them and engage them. Most of the time, they're not carrying anything bad. Well, once again, we've gotten inside their head. And if we get inside their head, we're hoping we're going to affect their behavior. We're going to hope they find Whitefish Bay. We're going to hope they find Glendale. We're going to hope they find West Allis. Okay? Because we want to share with the metropolitan area, okay, our challenges. Next slide. Is that it? Huh. Okay. Listen, we'll repeat anything you want, but I just sincerely believe there was an ad campaign years ago that I grew up with, educated consumers are our best customers. You've taken the risk to work with us. The least we can do with you is share the information we have at our disposal.